Now we are going to continue to have this closing session. I will ask two speakers to wrap up of discussion. First, for the morning session, I'd like to ask Mr. Maho Nasser to wrap up of discussion. Next, Mr. Ramu Damodaran will wrap up for discussion for afternoon session. Please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Before I wrap the morning session, I think, as I've been asked to do, I would like to first reiterate our thanks and appreciation to, of course, the Korean Association in support of the UNAI, President Kim Yong-gil, Ambassador Lee Si-yong, and all of our colleagues and friends and hosts who have made this possible, including, of course, the two university presidents who were in the previous panel and the students. As a child, I went to schools run by the United Nations. Schools run by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. It was interesting to hear the previous student speak about how news of that conflict is also something that people care about. A UN flag flew over the school that I went to when I was 5 years old, up to 9 years after. So for me, education and the UN have always gone side by side. In my mind as a child, and as I grew and I now work in the UN, it's interesting that this initiative, UNAI, brings the two together again. Academia, education, and the United Nations, as they should be. So for me, it's one of my priority initiatives because, again, it brings together and it brings the education under the fold of the United Nations. This morning, we heard from Dr. Kim Yong-gil, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, Lee Hong-koo, the Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova, and of course, Jeff Sachs, Special Advisor to the UN on to the Secretary General on MDGs. We then had a plenary session in which we had the honor to hear from 4 distinguished ministers of education from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, Kenya, Lithuania, and the United Arab Emirates. And unfortunately, they are not with us here for us to thank them again for leaving the World Education Forum that they had actually principally come to attend to be with us and share some of those insights and experiences from them. We heard from Secretary General Ban Ki-moon how the MDGs have been the largest anti-poverty campaign in history and how the new Sustainable Development Goals need to be ambitious but achievable. And I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that they are ambitious and achievable. The new goals are meant to help all countries in the world create a life of dignity for all. He also referred to the importance of youth in addressing the challenges of the future and how education needs to prepare them and equip them to fulfill their hopes and aspirations. Our hopes and aspirations too. They are more or less the same. Director General Bokova, Jeff Sachs, and others said that knowledge is at the core of any successful society. The kind of knowledge that we need in the world is not only scientific and technical, it's also moral knowledge. And by putting the focus on global citizenship, you're focusing on the moral aspect of citizenship. The ministers of education spoke about universities as existing to solve problems. Let's find ways to translate that into reality. Each of the ministers spoke about their own country and experiences and how they have developed programs to ensure that their investment in education addresses the needs of boys and girls. And I think it's very important, boys and girls, and are designed from the start to build global citizenship. One minister's key message was that education is a unique source of strength. And I quote, "Education helps us find who we are. It gives us moral strength and values and the knowledge and skills to promote human rights, achieve post-2015 development agenda, and an effective tool in addressing rising challenges." Minister Al-Hamadi from the United Arab Emirates spoke about his country as home to people from 200 nationalities who work together to build a modern society in which global citizenship is the norm, not the exception. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon reminded us that the value of education is not in memorizing information and passing tests, but in sowing the seeds of knowledge in young minds and nurturing these in a way that allows them to develop inquisitive and analytical minds that are able to think independently and creatively. And I think this is why the summary I have given you of the morning session is maybe brief, because it's not about remembering the words that the speakers mentioned this morning, but it's about being inspired by the main idea that education is key to our success. Education is going to be the path that will help us as United Nations, as member states, as academic institutions, come to find ways in which the 17 draft goals that will be approved in September are ambitious enough but also achievable. We need intellectual minds to think about how to find these solutions, and that these minds need to work together across the globe. And I think UN Academic Impact, working, and I hope more than just in Korea, with the Sustainable Solutions Network that Jeff Sachs spoke about globally, can definitely be a marker on the right path for us to move forward. A participant asked me this morning what is meant by global citizenship. To me, it is a feeling of belonging to the family of humanity, appreciating solidarity and understanding the need to respect planetary boundaries. Global citizenship does not mean a complete negation of national feelings or working for national interests. It is in understanding that a good international solution is a good national interest as well. Thank you.
Thank you. This is, to follow on my head, just an attempt to recap the day as it was after our opening session. I'd like to frame this actually in the context of the two questions that came, one from Bill Godelli and the other from the young gentleman who spent 19 years outside the Republic of Korea. And the two questions essentially were, how do you talk about global citizenship to an uninformed audience, in a sense? I mean, we are a vested audience and it's probably considered easy to talk to us. How do you do it to people who do not have that investment? And the other question, of course, that I think Meher reflected this very eloquently, is how do you reconcile global citizenship with your pride in your nation, and does it somehow compromise that pride? And in the course of the discussion this afternoon, my sense was that both these questions were really answered at three levels. One was the practical level, from the point of view of examples that were cited about how global citizenship can work, can make a difference. The second was really, in a sense, institutional and programmatic. What should universities do? What should courses do? How should the element of global citizenship be introduced? And the third, and to my mind probably the most important again, was the question of values. What are the values that we need to somehow bring into our lives so that we can emerge as global citizens without in any way diminishing our national pride and our national identity? In many senses, the whole debate or conversation about global citizenship at this particular time is very, very fortunate, because we have something to peg it upon. And that's right here in the title, in the context of the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Because we have been talking about global citizenship for a long time, but it was something a little fuzzy, obscure, something that you want and you wish, but you're never quite sure how it can translate into action. Now, finally, and this to my mind is a great virtue of this conference, and we owe a debt to its organizers, now we have a chance to anchor it in specific terms. At lunch today, President Sang Namin of the Seoul National University spoke about the polarization in the world. And I think this is another challenge to global citizenship, because when you find the world itself is polarized, you tend to believe or tend to wonder which side of the pole you should be attracted to. Whom should you be with? Whom should you be against? And then you come to the other point that he made, that at every point you realize that you are a receiver. You are someone who has benefited from simply being on this earth, from simply being alive. And therefore comes the obligation to give back. That idea of giving back as an attribute to global citizenship. We then had the CEO of Pungsan, Mr. Jim Robel, and he gave us again what I would like to cite as a very practical example about how his corporation had taken over a school which was at the bottom 2,500th in the Republic of Korea, and he was able to bring it right to the top by one very simple innovation. He converted it into a dormitory school so that students actually lived on the campus. They ate on the campus. They slept on the campus. They were with each other. Students were with each other 24 hours. And that, again, is, to my mind, a metaphor about global citizenship, that you cannot simply switch it on and off as you would algebra or biology or mechanical engineering. You have to live it and be immersed in it every waking and every non-waking moment to be able to make a difference to yourself and the world. And that is precisely what I think some of the later illustrations were able to bring to us. Ambassador O, in his remarks, which Ambassador Lee delivered so eloquently, spoke again about values, about justice, about human rights, about gender equality, about cultural diversity. And then he went on to talk about the new alliances that we would need. Now, some of these are familiar alliances, particularly for those of us who work at the United Nations. But I think the point that Ambassador O made was these are not merely institutional alliances. These have to be alliances with a purpose. So when you bring in NGOs, you bring in the academic community, you bring in the corporate or private sector together in this quest for global citizenship, then you're able to match each other's strengths, compensate for each other's weaknesses, and thereby create something which is of benefit to each one of these constituencies. Ambassador O also spoke about something which is very important. Again, this is something which is immediately attuned to people like Meher and Ambassador Lee, who have worked at the United Nations, that there is a need for cooperation and greater synergies between UN entities. I myself am very surprised that it's often at conferences or meetings like these, sponsored and organized by well-wishers who are not in the UN, that I myself learn much about what the UN is doing. And I think that message of Ambassador O, how we at the UN must learn to work together and must effectively work together to be able to realize some of the ideals of global citizenship, is a very, very important point he made. He added two more points: the importance of monitoring, constant monitoring. You cannot simply go and say you're doing something unless you measure the progress you've made and see why you have fallen short, if you have fallen short, and the importance of mandates. Because in a structure like the United Nations, there is one level which really works because people want it to work. They believe the Secretary General. They believe what is good. But ultimately, it has to be given the muscle of a mandate which all member states of the United Nations and the people they represent subscribe to. We then had, and of course, Ambassador O also spoke very, very fittingly about Aspire, and I think our last two speakers justified his faith in that movement. We then had Bill Gaudelli, who spoke about, and began with this wonderful quote from Buckminster Fuller about humanity now writing its final exam. And it's a little eerie or creepy to think when Buckminster Fuller must have said that, because we've probably been writing that final exam ever since, or keeping on rewriting it. And at every moment, we feel that this is finally the tipping point. This is the point where the examination has to be written. And then if you extend that, and then this is the point that, again, he made so beautifully, try and look at global citizenship not only in terms of the immediate practical values it gives you, but also the less immediate values. And I think he used the example of the aesthetic as much as the material benefits of the biosphere. A very, very compelling example. And then the entire question of the temporal nature of being, of the fact that we cannot and should not revel in the fact that we are ignorant, and the fact that this requires construction of curriculum so that we can truly, by creating certainly new teaching modules and new teaching movement, escape, in your phrase, the boundaries of time. President Yong-il Kim, who is always as moving when he speaks as when he writes, anchored the entire question of global citizenship in the one word which I think sometimes eludes us when we think about it. Because we think about it as fraternity, of collectivity, of brotherhood. He brought in the word responsibility. Because global citizenship implies that we must, if we are going to use and anchor it in sustainability, we have a duty to be responsible to each other and to the planet. And to the fact, and he was able to very meticulously link every one of the 17 proposed Sustainable Development Goals to the principles of the United Nations academic impact. And, above all, assert that this is not merely an intellectual premise, this is not merely an academic basis, but it is something that has a sound moral foundation. And if we take that precept of the sound moral foundation, then I think that even member states of the United Nations would realize that they're not negotiating about paragraphs or commas or phrases. They are really coming to terms with what is a moral responsibility. And that, if that were to animate negotiation, that would make political discourse much easier, just as it would make our lives in the academic community much more accessible and more profitable. President Boguguk spoke very importantly about education as being necessary to be accessible, relevant, and of quality, and of accompanying this by action. And I like that phrase because this again brought us right to the end where Park Suhun showed us a quotation from Herbert Spencer saying the only benefit of education should be action and not knowledge. And this was reflected there as well, that if you do not have accompanying action to education, then it becomes meaningless. And then that wonderful phrase he used about academic solidarity. It's an important phrase because again, and I apologize because even though I've quite cheerfully infiltrated into the academic world, I'm not an academic myself and can never hope to be one. But I realize that one of the qualities that distinguishes an academic is the fact of individuality. And so when you talk about academic solidarity, it again might seem, as our friend suggested about global solidarity, that it is in some way compromising your individual intellectual integrity. But it is not. Because if you talk about academic solidarity, which is based again upon a value system and upon a conviction that that which is good must prevail, then there is a logic to it that cannot be denied. And of course, again, thank you, sir, for having given the weight of your words to aspire and say it must grow. We then had my dear, dear friend whom I never can quite understand, Jan Thoma. Jan, reinventing the frame of education. And I'm very grateful, and I know that Meher will join me in this, in your offer or the idea of creating an entity within the University of Sorbonne for global citizenship education, whether this is going to be an international center or the modalities I'm sure you will explore with President Boutry. And again, I think there are some of us who are not necessarily we personally, but some who are diffident about the idea of institutionalization. But maybe this is a situation that requires some sort of a entity to be able to collate. And after all, 4 years ago, who would have thought that an entity like UNAI Korea would come into being and be so successful? So all power to you. I hope that you can work on this with the distinguished president, and I'm sure that we would look forward to hearing about its progress. As you said, every idea needs a home, time, and space. And I think, in a sense, if the University of Sorbonne is able to give this all three, then we can do it, and to add to your final point, sustain it with human action and that spirit. We then think about the question of the Global Center for Excellence, which is another model which Dr. Chang, the president of Handog, global university site. It was a global center for excellence, which has been established, the entrepreneurship center, which has been established at his university. Now, here again, the whole question is, how do you tackle an issue? His phrase was a problem-oriented approach. In other words, a field-oriented exercise, a project-based approach. In other words, go and find the problems. Don't just assume that everything is okay or is happening, but then you must go ahead and then try and identify where exactly your action, your academic inputs can come in. And I think the very powerful examples that we had from Handong Global University, GET, which is familiar to many of us, thanks to the pioneering work of Dr. George Kim, GEM, which I myself had not heard of in such detail, the whole idea of being able to create energy from sugarcane and thereby also alleviate economic distress, and of course, the larger question of the entire technical cooperation model which both of these represent. So this is something where I think global citizenship, as I said at the beginning, assumes a sheer practical dimension, but and takes on that particular strength. The idea, again, where we think of academics and reason, not purely in terms of disciplines, but a way of thinking, is something which I think distinguished the conversation that we had earlier. This is again something which Dr. Devekar, when she spoke from India, again, the practical instances. And what was remarkable in her presentation was the idea of compassion and love, to go back to one of the later phrases, is not 21st century. It was not discovered in 2015. It did not begin with the idea of global citizenship. It had been nurtured in 1896 in Pune, in India, by the founder of the university to which she belongs. And then, when you think of that, how from the home for widows, which was set up at that time, to the homes that the university is now constructing in Tanzania, in Jamaica, and the work that it's planning to do in other parts of the world, that shows you how the idea itself never changes, just the examples and the manifestations of it do. We then had Rector Mutanov from the Kazakh National University, who spoke about the novel and yet challenging dimensions of academic work, of how this needs to ultimately bring in, at a practical level, but in a very specific focus. And this, again, I think for all of us, is a model, with all respect, of an educational institution building upon its strengths. In the case of Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, as the rector made clear, it has been sustainability and the environment. And at every level, as the university celebrated its 80th anniversary last year, it had this engagement to look back to. The work that it did with the United Nations at the Rio conference in 3 years ago in 2012, the work that it is now doing by integrating universities in the region in the Sustainability Hub. So this is again something which I think offers for us a model of not necessarily being too diverse or too active in what we're trying to do, but realize that there is a core competency we have which we can build upon. We then came to our students from Aspire. Junia, who is an old friend, and I've been privileged to see him nurture Aspire in Japan over the past few years and see how it's really become not only a national movement, but also working with partners like UNAI Korea. And he spoke about the 3 C's which animate Aspire Japan: collaboration, creativity, continuity. But then when he went on to his later presentation, I could discern 3 more C's, which is curiosity, which he mentioned. If you're not curious, how are you to learn? And if you're not curious, how can you communicate the excitement to someone else? Courtesy, respect for others, respect for their opinions, respect for them even when they disagree with you, or perhaps particularly when they disagree with you. And the last C, curriculum again, a point that he made, how students want to work with faculty and with teachers in changing that aspect of it. And of course, the Aspire chapter from Korea, Park Sa-hoon, Again, his reference to connect, collaborate, and change. And then the whole progression, if you will, of advocacy, of volunteering, and of campaigning. And again, he used the two words which had not been used until then, as far as, not only in the afternoon session, but even in the morning: love and compassion. And I think one of the things that we are proudest of in the academic impact is that in our effort, or in our ability to identify academic solutions to the problems with which the UN is dealing, we have also been able to identify the change within ourselves. And the fact that ultimately relationships between nations, relationships between institutions, relationships between peoples ultimately boil down to the relationship between a person and a person. And so we should not fight shy of words like love. We should not fight shy of words like compassion. We should not fight shy of words like trust. We should not fight shy of words like faith. Because it is those words that animate us and give us the power to change the world as we would like it to be, and to truly be global citizens without in any way making ourselves anonymous or less regarded. Thank you enormously for the opportunity. Thank you for being here. Thank you, President King. Thank you, Ambassador Lee. And thank you for all our wonderful, wonderful helpers and staff who have made this conference such a resounding success. We're looking forward to the third UNAI Forum in Seoul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damodaran. Finally, at last, I'd like to invite Ambassador Lee Shi-young, the chairman of the Advisory Council of the UNAI Korea, and the former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and Ambassador to the United Nations, to deliver closing remarks. Please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
Having heard what an excellent wrap-up of sessions by these gentlemen, and I was beginning to wonder, do we need closing remarks? They all explained what they felt, what we learned from the presentations and discussions. Do I have to do it? Well, of course, we wanted to close this at 4 o'clock, but
Yes.
almost half an hour passed. But would you kindly give me just 10 minutes, maybe less than 10 minutes, to read my closing remarks, which there are many duplications and repetitions, but perhaps it's a good way of remembering things by repetition. So allow me to read my closing remarks. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to all of you for your kind and positive participation in the morning and afternoon sessions, and for your invaluable contributions and inspirations to this forum today. I now strongly believe that this timely gathering on education in the perspective of the United Nations academic impact has inspired us all and has given to all relevant stakeholders encouragement, enthusiasm, and insightful guidance for the future of UNAI. From my point of view, today's presentations and discussions can be summarized in 2 points. First, how we can contribute to the United Nations post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals through education, focusing on the global university network of UNAI. And secondly, what is the distinct role to be played by UNAI to foster global citizenship education. First, I'd like to emphasize the role of education in the next 15 years. We are now standing at a historic turning point ahead of the declaration of the United Nations Summit for post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals to be adopted this September in New York, which will set up a grand and transformative agenda to tackle all the sustainable development issues around the world. Education is already included as one of 17 goals in the post-2015 SDGs, and all member states now agree that education is one of the most essential cross-cutting issues, along with the framework for action of World Education Forum in Incheon being currently discussed. Today's UNAI for Seoul Forum will serve as a useful basis to elaborate education-related goals in the post-2015 process. Since its launch, initiated by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2010, UNAI has carried out vigorous research and outreach activities based on close relationship among world-class universities and institutions of higher education, thereby activating so-called intellectual social responsibility. As stated in the 10 principles of UNAI, we higher education representatives and stakeholders need to spare no effort to tackle sustainable development issues through knowledge sharing, capacity building in developing countries, and facilitation of entrepreneurship in parallel with our continued efforts to promote universal access to quality education. As so well emphasized by Her Excellency President Park Geun-hye in her keynote speech at World Education Forum yesterday's opening session in Incheon, providing students in its remote areas with education platform based on the ICT will also be one of many good ideas to explore in the future. To achieve this end, further collaboration and coordination with other education-related initiatives, such as Global Education First Initiative, we all know it's GEFI, launched by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, is indeed very much necessary. Moreover, active engagement and participation of younger generation, as we see this afternoon, including Aspire of UNAI and YEG of GEFI, are crucial for the successful implementation of the UNAI 10 principle, as well as the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Secondly, in addition to the importance of education in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals for the next 15 years, global citizenship education has recently emerged as one of the most urgent priority tasks to be considered and to be put into action by all of us today. Excuse me. As so well eloquently pointed out by His Excellency President Park Geun-hye yesterday at the opening session, and also well demonstrated today by many interventions, global citizenship education indicates a new direction of education in the 21st century for a more peaceful, just, inclusive, and sustainable world. It is also a crucial instrument to realize purposes and mandate of the United Nations Charter by sharing universal values focused on the humanity. The UN report for post-2015 development agenda already includes a target to foster global citizenship education and more serious discussions on its concept, as well as curriculum and pedagogies, are being held in the United Nations headquarters and also in UNESCO. Especially given the strong need to tackle global challenges, including the recent prevailing trend of violent extremism and intolerance, global citizenship education is now receiving more urgent attention. Korea should and will play a continued leading role in expanding this idea in the future. I expect that today's presentations and discussions during this forum will serve as an important stepping stone to a more realistic application to educational fields and decision-making processes in general, and the processes at the 70th session of General Assembly this fall in particular, thus making substantial contribution to the three pillars of United Nations, namely peace and security, development, and human rights. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to quote an old saying in Korea. I quote, "Education is a long-range plan which spans hundreds of years," unquote. We should fully understand the importance of shaping education policy in the long term. As so well pointed out this morning by Secretary General Ban, Director General Bokwa, and Professor Sachs, we are all convinced that activities of UNAI, including today's meaningful gathering, will constitute various steps to achieve a better, peaceful, prosperous, and just world through education. I hope more and more universities in Korea and in other parts of the world would join the UNAI and form and expand a global network among them to promote its 10 principles with a view to working together to help achieve high and noble objectives of the United Nations. I found this afternoon that there are some developments, regional developments or national developments in this direction, expanding global network among UNAI, national UNAIs. Good examples are Kazakhstan and Korea. We have the consortium of university, the UNAI member universities, counting 64 universities, formed a consortium, and we call it UNAI Korea. And we learned from our Kazakhstan the education minister that in Kazakhstan also they have UNAI University Consortium. Then I would like to encourage all UNAI universities throughout the world form national UNAI University Consortium, like consortium UNAI France, UNAI Kazakhstan, UNAI India, something like that. And also, why not? Regional network. The Kazakhstan represents Central Asia. France represents EU, and also India represents Southeast Asia, and Korea represents Northeast Asia. We can form networks of national consortiums together. And I imagine that, for instance, under the circumstances of the relationship among China, Korea, Japan, young people aspire members of China, Japan, and Korea get together somewhere in China or Japan or in Korea to talk about common interests, the future of the earth. And as you so well expressed by Don Sam, that the what was it? The planet. You said something like one in the planet or something like that. And that spirit of becoming one all together as a global citizens is so important for the young people now in every continent. So I like to encourage strongly that national consortiums or regional consortiums or global consortium could be organized in the future, particularly maybe by the Aspire young people who are present here today. Well, before closing this forum, I'd like to express on behalf of all participants, UNI, and organizers of this forum, our deep appreciation to all those young students who joined us voluntarily under the flag of UNAI Aspire in order to help prepare this forum, particularly for the past several weeks, day and night. They have also demonstrated vividly, eloquently, that the potentiality of what their generation as typical model global citizens can do and contribute now, and what they can do in the future globally in the name of UNAI and Jeffy. With these few closing words, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare this forum adjourned. Thank you very much. If you allow me to do so, I'd like to call the names of those who've been working several months so hard, day and night, that I like to give them our appreciation all together. Let me call the name of those first. Belonging to UNAI Korea Secretariat, Professor Park Won-gon, Secretary, Executive Secretary of UNAI Korea, and then Secretariat staff, Jung Bin-na, Kim Deun, Kim Eun-hye,
Please stand up.
Kim Young-sil, please stand up. Please.
They are there.
They're out.
Ambassador there. No,
Oh, yeah,
just
I
sit
can
there.
Would you please give them big hand to appreciate? And then all those Aspire volunteers working so hard today, they came 6 o'clock in the morning to prepare for this everything. Please stand up, all those volunteers from Aspire.
They are there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, officially, we'll close the second United Nations Academic Impact Seoul Forum. Once again, on behalf of the organizers, I express my sincere gratitude for your participation for the forum. Last, we wanted to take a picture all together. So please come forward. We are going to arrange your seats for taking picture together. Thank you very much.